Ladies and gentlemen, Jason Plum.
Okay, so we are here today to try and discuss what's going on with the idea of a hybrid deployment of the Omnibus and the CNG. Now, this is something that is abnormal for most people. They think you need to be one or the other. But in reality, the charts have been designed and are implemented even in production in such a way that every individual component can be used either in or out of the Omnibus or Kubernetes, whichever way you want to look at it. Now, we have some customers that want to make use of features that are not currently a cloud native item, such as GitLab pages. And this is where the confusion tends to come in and where the complication actually arises. So I'm going to hit share on my screen real quick. And we're going to go first off right over to the actual standing issue for pages support in the cloud native GitLab. So what we have right now is the fact that the way pages works is it effectively does sharing off of a static file system. In doing that, it requires that something write to that file system and that all pages nodes have the ability to read from that file system. That is a pretty obvious disclaimer of shared file system required, both between Kubernetes, or I should say between Sidekick and any of the pages.
Jason, can I interrupt you for a second? Your screen is kind of flickering a little bit on my screen. I'm not sure why, but I'm wondering if you shared a window and maybe it'd be better to share a whole monitor or something.
I'm seeing the flickering as well.
Does that go away at all now?
Nope.
No, it's still flickering.
Okay, so
worse if anything.
It's pretty much Zoom has decided to start flickering on me again. It doesn't always do that. Let me see if just a window does that. 1 second.
Okay, it's not the end of the world.
How about that? Is that less flickering?
Still.
No.
Nope, still flickering.
Okay, Zoom has given up for the day. Either way, what we're looking at right now is...
Go ahead and share it. We'll deal with the flickering.
What we're working with right now is GitLab org charts, GitLab issue number 37, specifically around the GitLab pages support. The fact that it requires shared file system between the Sidekick nodes and all of the pages nodes means that we can't put this in Kubernetes at this time because we can't assume that people have shared file systems or can correctly implement them either. The way to get around this is where the hybrid comes into play. We split the Sidekick job that actually populates the job artifacts into the file system away from the Kubernetes pods that are being deployed to do the background work. And we place that onto a node that does have access to the shared file system that pages consumes. Then that shared file system can be used by any number of pages nodes. They're behind a load balancer, for example, and then you can actually get pages to work in that regard. The problem, as I mentioned earlier, comes around to how do you maintain and update this scenario, right? Because everybody's familiar with, apt-get update for the Omnibus or Helm upgrade for the charts. You do still have to be concerned about this mix, right? You want to make sure that the version of the charts that you're running is running the same Rails code base as the version of Omnibus that you're running. Now, the question there is not how do we make that function, it's who is in control of the database. This is the part that everybody gets caught up in. If you want to have the charts in control of the database, you leave the migrations on. If you want to have, you leave the migrations on as a part of the chart and disable them as part of the Omnibus. If you want the Omnibus install that has the Sidekick and pages on it to actually control it, you disable them in the charts and leave it enabled in the Omnibus. The one distinct difference in how this works, if you have a large deployment of, say, 5-node Kubernetes cluster in which you've deployed the GitLab application and a 3-node cluster that you've actually used for deploying your Omnibus with pages, you have to decide which one's going to be in control of the database. If you're going to have the omnibusing control. You can safely turn off the migrations inside of the charts and run the upgrade on the charts. It will not restart the application until all of the database migrations are completed. When you run the update on the omnibus and you have the migrations enabled, it will do all of that work. Then as soon as all of that migration is done, all of the containers will begin to restart with the new version inside of Kubernetes. If you choose to do multi-node and you have, say, disabled the automatic migrations and you manually run the pre-migrations and then perform node restarts and then manually run the post-migrations, as soon as the pre-migrations are complete, the unicorn pods will begin to restart. So you don't have to wait necessarily for everything to operate in that fashion. We do still have a lot of documentation to do in regards to how exactly this works. And for those that are interested in that documentation, I do apologize. We've just not had time to write it all down and work through all the scenarios where we have to worry about these things. Now, I've just talked for the last like 30 minutes. Did I assuage most concerns? If you have other questions, please raise them.
You only talked for about 5 minutes, really.
It feels like more.
When you say which system is in control of the database, you're referring specifically to the Rails migrations that happen during migration, correct?
Yes.
Or is there some other control of the database that you're referring to there?
That is actually what I'm referring to. I should have said which side of the application is in control of the database migrations. Yeah. Because you can technically do either one. Like you could turn off automatic migrations on both if you wanted to, and manually go into either the omnibus install and run the git migrate task, or go into the task runner pod that's a part of the Kubernetes and run the migrate tasks yourself. So you can still do it as a manual behavior if you choose in the HA environment, or you can have one or the other controlling it. What you don't want is to upgrade both at the same time and have them going, I'm gonna run migrations. Theoretically, you shouldn't run into a problem because you should only ever run the migrations once and they are idempotent. However, when you don't know which one's doing it, where are your logs? Right? You should know where it's being done just so you know where to look.
Right, that makes sense. And in terms of the configuration itself of having some Sidekick nodes that are running as part of the charts and some that are not, is that easy to configure? Like which, like the Sidekick nodes have labels or roles or something that you can configure? Is that fairly straightforward?
Actually, it is pretty straightforward. If you look at the charts issue 37, we have a related item for Sidekick enable queue negation akin to Sidekick Cluster. When you're running the omnibus, you either run Sidekick or you run Sidekick Cluster. If you run Sidekick, all the jobs that you have it configured for will run. If you use Sidekick Cluster, you basically specify the exact set of queues that you want to run, or run all queues but that. Or you can specify groups that have X many of runners for X queues. Our chart already has the ability to split those queues out manually if you so chose. What we've done as a result of the work that I did to investigate this hybrid approach is actually implement a way to say, run everything but, and then be able to do whatever you want to do in terms of your splitting of queues. In production, for example, we have quote best effort, which basically has run any job, but you only have so many, so best effort is to try and get all the work done. But we also have dedicated higher priority queues that actually have full sets of nodes that are dedicated just to handling background mail and make sure that merge requests are handled at a timely fashion and things like this. When you do a larger deployment, that's when you take the quote unquote all-in-one pod of Sidekick and actually start splitting those things out. So you would have this group that runs with 3 pods, and this one that's auto-scaled from 2 to 10, depending on its load. And if you suddenly got a massive amount of CI jobs, you'd want more things processing those background jobs. If you just have mailroom running and you know that you're getting some email incoming, but not that much, you might want 1, maybe 2 pods. Most customers who run the omnibus are running single instances, at which point they're behaving exactly like the charts do with all-in-one. It's when you get into somebody like the future site visit that we have, where they're going to have 4 nodes of Sidekick, and these are all going to be configured slightly differently. That's when breaking those queues up comes into play.
Right, and that's when customer support could become really challenging.
No more challenging than running 4 separate queue sets on different nodes. The methodology, the exact implementation is different, barely. But the methodology of which ones do you break and why is no different.
Got it, okay.
So then, Jason, when you're upgrading, is there anything to be particularly aware of when you have those Sidekick queues manually broken out?
If you have manually broken out the Sidekick queues and you don't have something running, quote, all, the only thing you might get bitten as is if you specifically specified every single queue by hand if there's a new queue added. This can actually happen in the omnibus as well.
Diana, Ken, did you guys have any questions?
I was just going to say that just most people in the omnibus don't do fancy Sidekick queue management.
Right. Like I said, most people won't do this. They'll be like, just run all the stuff.
Yeah.
Which is where the quote, like I said, the default all-in-one is what you get, because it's the exact same thing that you get as a part of the omnibus. It's only when you get into, 5, 10, 15 plus thousands of users that you really have to start thinking about this. And you have to think about this at scale, whether you're running it in Redis or if you're running it on omnibus in VM fleets.
Francis, I'm in learning mode, so just listening. Thank you.
Aren't we all?
Okay, let's see. The next item that I want to call out is our chart explicitly does not currently provide an HA production-ready database. We call this out, we document this, and we tell people to bring their own. So this is another example of where you can use the omnibus to provide your PGHA with Bouncer and all of this support if you're doing on-premise or fully self-managed in a cloud. This comes down to configuring it as database-only nodes or database and console-only nodes, and actually setting up just the database behaviors. The most recent example that we have is the addition of the geo behaviors to the charts with 12.5. And in 12.6, automatic migrations will come into play. The testing environment that we have in play and that we've documented how to actually implement is to actually install the omnibus on a pair of VMs. And on one side of the geo cluster, you have a database and only a database and Redis. And then you have the other side that has the database and Redis and just enough to actually configure the replication. Every other function of the Rails code base, console, everything else is turned off. You could replace that functionality instead of being a single omnibus VM, but following the directions to set up PGHA using our omnibus, or bringing your own from GCP or Amazon or Azure or DigitalOcean, any number of our partners. They've been confirmed to work with them as long as they support the version of PostgreSQL that we're attempting to use.
already picked up on that idea that they could supply their own database separate that was run by their database engineers.
Right? And at load, it's not a bad idea. And that's the reason from like the instantiation of the charts work. It has been, hey, bring your own database or get a provided database when you're doing this at large scale, because you need to do it right. And inside of Kubernetes, stateful applications like a database, which are very specialized in how they maintain and replicate, has not been great. It's still not great. It's a lot better than it was, but it's still not something you really want to do. Now, I think the largest item is the fact that we have an open issue, but haven't actually implemented the ability to split the Redis queues. Larissa, we're going to have to find that issue. I know it's there. I know we have it. We probably want to P2 that and try to get it into January.
Okay.
I just realized that's really going to be a blocker for production.
Tell us more about splitting the Redis queues. What's the challenge there? What's the solution?
It's a matter of how do you configure it. So basically, Redis is a memory store, right? You're doing key value store as treating it kind of as a database and a cache. Some of that is stateful. That stateful information is not super critical, but it can be rebuilt, but in large instances can be expensive to rebuild. Currently in our own production, we actually split the cache, the Redis usage in 3 ways. I don't remember every piece of it, but it's a part of our 50K reference architecture that explains the number of Redis nodes and which one goes where and things like that. That is an item that's not present, I think, in the charts right now, because we had to provide a means of how do you do that, because you're pointing at different Redis servers for each one. And we recently added the necessary Sentinel support, but not the necessary ability to actually say cache goes there, application settings go there. This is all functionally in the application, but it's not exposed as configuration items as a part of the chart at this time.
Do you know the state of that Redis issue? Is it in for scheduling?
I think it is.
Okay. And does that need to be a P2 that's pulled in soon because of the upcoming on-site?
No, if we're going to work to bring Sidekick in the end of this fiscal year, then we need to do this sooner than later.
Okay.
I found it. It is GitLab org charts, GitLab issues number 96. And the related item of number 1644 raised by our very active community supporter here, Dimitri. He's been raising MRs and functionality through Rails for like the last 3 weeks straight. So, busy fella. This is definitely currently in for scheduling and marked as a feature. It, however, is not prioritized right now.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, Gerard, they're definitely basically the same thing.
Sorry, Jason, I was
splitting of queues. It's basically, if you look at 96 and 1644 issues, 96 is currently marked as closed. 1644 is basically exposing how to actually configure it.
96 was marked as closed, with the last comment being that it needs to be implemented in .com first.
That may have been done.
Okay, yeah, that comment is a year old. Okay, I'll look into it some more.
Yeah, quote, as far as I know, no one does this on Omnibus except us. So I know it's functional. We have an example, and you're right. There's probably nobody else running 25, 50,000 users and has any reason to do this. But if we're documenting it as a part of the larger verified architectures, then it's something that we need to better document and expose through both projects.
Okay, that makes sense. What other topics should we be aware of, Jason?
That's probably the biggest one right there. I believe this particular customer is talking about the possibility of running everything they can inside of Kubernetes. But I believe the last time I read a question, it was specifically about running all the stateless operations inside of Kubernetes and running everything else as a managed pet. So Gitly, Postgres, Redis, object storage, etc. In that case, it's pretty much making sure that everything can talk to everything. That means that the Gitly nodes are configured to speak to the correct endpoints. And since the outside of the cluster is HTTPS API, this won't really be an issue. It's a matter of just configuring Gitly correctly to tell it its endpoint is inside the cluster. The same thing goes with everything talking to Postgres and Redis. Object storage is generally spoken over HTTPS, so this is not a concern whether it's in or outside of the cluster. Everything should be able to reach it. When it comes to the database is a database as long as Gitly can get to it, and any other component they choose to run outside, which if they're running a hybrid, they have to, by the way. This is not a connectivity issue. It's a matter of telling the chart where the database is and where the Redises are, etc. It's just a matter of collecting all of the necessary information and providing the correct configuration.
Okay, great. So are we done?
I think we primarily covered what's actually in play. I can show you an example of what it looks like to have everything running in terms of this fully separated behavior where only the state is operating outside and all the state lists is running inside, if anybody really wants.
Sure, let's see it. And we will deal with the flickering screen problem.
Yeah, I'm not sure why it's decided to be all flickery on me again. Zoom likes to do this, and I'm not really sure why. I think I typed that right. Indeed I did, okay. So I actually already happen to have 2 VMs prepped, and I'm going to close out a few extra windows over here so that I don't fully explode my poor machine.
By the way, that's not flickering.
Like I said, hi Zoom, what's up? Sometimes it flickers, sometimes it does absolutely nothing, and I have no idea why. Okay, so that is up. My pages instance should be up as well. Should be up as well. That's currently running 12.4.2. K3S has started itself up. That's probably going to start flickering. Let's put this to green so it's a little easier to see. Let's see. Support. Oops. Wow, I can type today. Classic live demo problem, right? So that is, you can see that my kube control is currently on 114, and this K3S is currently running 115.4, so this is actually running over here. Immersion. I got 214 there, so get those aligned so I don't confuse the poor thing. Anyone having any problems reading the screen?
No, it's great.
Okay. I'll rerun that without the line wrap involved. So you can see right here, I have pages, which is running 246, which aligns to the 12.4 branches. Now, I am betting I may have an issue with the actual deployed instance, because while this says that it's 246 at the time it was deployed, if I'm telling it to pull in the master images, I probably have an omnibus node that's running 12.4 and a bunch of charts that are designed to run 12.6 images. So let's see what my configuration states. Meanwhile, my poor CPU is choking. Okay. Global version. Oh, hey, look, I do actually have them pegged at 12.4.2. Awesome. So I didn't inadvertently break my setup. That always helps. New window here. Let's see if Chrome makes the screen flicker. I'm gonna pull my ingresses to see what my, there we go. Helps if I have the right host name. Which my system no longer recognizes. Make sure my pods are actually running, because I'm having a problem. That would be part of it. Okay, well, it looks like they're starting up now.
Hey, Jason, newbie question. What is that display on the left there?
That is the K9S command line utility. It's a handy way to just be able to navigate through the Save Your Kubernetes cluster without using kube control get blank, kube control describe blank. By default, it comes up with pods. And I can, for example, hit D and get a describe, which is
nice.
output.
Very nice.
I can also hit L and get to logs, and it will do a follow on the logs. So I can actually see what's going on. So dependencies has completed. You can see workhorse just started up and connected to Redis. So I should be getting an actual connected session here in a second. I'll bet you anything my CPU is pegged. Yeah, load average of 9.7. It's a little busy. Okay, so at least.
Okay, if this is going to take too long to start up, it's not that big a deal.
Yeah, it's taking forever because my poor machine is crushed trying to do Zoom and screen and all the everything else. Oh, it's listening. Now it has to pass the health check and then fire itself up. Either way, let me do this. So what I have here is I have set the external URL to the actual reachable endpoint that consumers would use. So you can see it's the exact same endpoint that I'm using to try and reach it right now. It's not there, but and I've set pages external URL to be pages dot. So if I were to go to root.pages.example.com, since the VM is up and running, you'd actually get the pages output from my instance. Pages has been enabled, and you'll see that I explicitly turned on Sidekick Cluster because I want to use Sidekick Cluster and define which queues it's supposed to be operating, which is, for example, queue group pages, as opposed to actually using Sidekick itself, which you can see I have turned off because I don't want it to process all queues, and I don't want to have to edit a file to tell it only use that. I want to say, run Sidekick as a process, but only for this queue. So that's what these three lines and this line do, is actually turn off Sidekick, but run just the pages. I have Workhorse and Unicorn turned off because I don't need it to have a web server that has the API. I don't need it to have the smart proxy in front of that. What I have done is configured all of the object storage because I need it to be able to actually reach out and get the information as a part of the Sidekick behaviors. I'm not running Sidekick, but the configuration is the same. Okay? So if you want to run Sidekick, which is the Rails piece, you have to configure enough of the Rails piece for Sidekick to actually operate, which means if you have object storage, you must configure that. So I've configured all of the object storage pieces. I've configured the necessary Gitly token because this has to communicate with Gitly. And I've set that string explicitly because the deployed Kubernetes also speaks to the same Gitly. So they need to agree on that secret. I've configured it to talk to the registry. Everybody has to be in the same page, right? This is currently running Postgres, because remember, our chart does not expose Postgres in a production environment. And if you're running a piece of the application outside of Kubernetes, you have to run the database outside so that everybody can reach it. I'm also doing the same thing for Redis because Redis has the exact same issue. It's a TCP protocol, and balancing that inside of Kubernetes is a problem. So to be best off on a critical service like this, run it outside if there's anything outside. And of course, you can also see that I'm running Gitly and I'm listening on local so that the cluster can talk to it. Right? So the key components there are configured the secrets for everything to communicate and run which components you need to outside. The biggest ones in this case are Sidekick Cluster is configured instead of Sidekick itself, and that your state is maintained outside of the chart.
This is great, Jason. It's really good to just visually see those configurations.
Is that configuration file accessible?
Is this that exact content?
Yeah. Is there somewhere we can go and check it out some more?
I may have it in a comment.
Okay.
I have a feeling that something is causing these pods to restart, and I'm not sure why. Readiness probe failures. Yeah, I bet you I'm getting a problem where it's being killed because with the CPU being as loaded as it is, it's not starting the pod in a timely enough fashion. So I'm looking to see if I actually included the necessary configuration in the comment that I made. I have not included all of the configuration in the comment that I have made. I have made the mention that you need to use external state, an omnibus instance to run pages, the Nginx for that pages, and only the pages queue through, though I did not specifically mention Sidekick Cluster there. Right. So this exact configuration, as you're asking, I can make this effectively available. I'm actually working on the documentation that explains what this is, which will include the sample configuration behaviors.
Thanks.
I think the documentation would be great. If you drop anything into the comments of the issue, it would just be that top part where you have the Sidekick Cluster enable part, just so we remember that.
Right, and like I said, I'm working on this documentation so that I can have as much of it ready for on-site. There is still
Awesome.
the configuration because there is one change that actually has to be made to the charts, which is here, adding the ability to configure pages. Because if you don't actually populate the settings, Unicorn's not going to know what to do with it, nor will Sidekick. So you got to actually configure it. Otherwise, where we stand when it comes to the pages support.
All right, great. I think we've got enough clarity here. I'm not sure whether your service is actually going to run there or not, but this answers all my questions and kind of explains everything pretty clearly.
Right. Basically, if I could get it to actually start, right? If I could get it to actually start, you basically have the GitLab UI there, and you would be able to see me go make a change and wait approximately 10 to 15 seconds and have it actually populate to the content in pages. If I go on GitLab, if I pop into the actual content directory on the omnibus, right? Remember, there's no shared file system between K3S, any of the pods whatsoever, and the actual pages directly in the omnibus, you can see that the population of the files into the file system is actually done. The pages job, basically the way everything works when you do pages is you build everything and you create an artifact at the end of the job. And you have the pages job and the pages deploy. Pages deploy triggers the background, which actually results in the Sidekick job that runs, pulls the artifact that was generated from the pages job, and then deploys that into the file systems that pages consumes. Pages then recognizes that content, and when you try to access it, does the necessary authorization, if enabled, to actually grant access to that static content. So if I actually went to the
Got it. That makes sense.
MinIO instance, I could browse through the artifacts bucket for the repository this is a part of and go right to that particular artifact, download it, and unpack it, and I would find the same pages too, for example.
Right, that makes sense. Okay. All right, well, unless there are any other questions or you have any other points, Jason, I think we can maybe wrap it up.
I don't have any other immediate points, please. If anybody has questions, feel free to ask.
No, I don't have any questions. That was really great. Thank you, Jason. Are we going to drop the recording somewhere?